When I started my new job at a sleek consultancy firm downtown, I wasn't searching for excitement or drama. I was looking for something far less glamorous, a sense of self. At 34, I'd built a full life, a stable marriage, 2 spirited children, and a home that pulsed with the rhythm of family life. Cereal bowls left out, crayon drawings on the fridge, bedtime stories that ended with someone snoring, often me. But somewhere along the way, I'd begun to vanish in the daily choreography of being useful to others. I used to have ambition. I had fire once. Then came maternity leave, then a freelance phase, then a long pause. Marcus, my husband, had been supportive through it all. Still was. He made space for me to re-enter the professional world without pressure or guilt. "Go," he'd said, grinning one night as I stared nervously at the job offer. "We'll figure it out." And so I went. The office was modern, full of glass walls and ergonomic chairs. Everything smelled like ambition and lemon-scented sanitizer. My title was strategy consultant, but what I really wanted to be was visible again. Not just as mom, not just as wife, but as me. I wanted to sit in meetings and say smart things and have someone nod. I wanted to get dressed in the morning and feel like the person I used to imagine I'd become. That's when I met Kamal. I didn't notice him at first. Not really. He wasn't loud or ostentatious. He was just present. When he introduced himself with an easy smile and offered to show me around, I thought, how nice. I had no idea that this quiet kindness would shake something loose in me that I thought had long settled. Kamal sat beside me, separated by a modest partition. He wasn't flashy. He had a calm confidence, the kind that made you lean in without realizing you had. He welcomed me with chocolate and a smile. "New starts need sugar," he'd said. Not flirtatious, just thoughtful. He showed me the ropes, how to navigate Slack, who to avoid on group projects, which client demanded pixel-perfect presentations. Kamal noticed things. He remembered I lived in Logan Square. He adjusted a meeting to start 30 minutes later so I could manage school drop-offs without panic. "Figured this buys you time," he'd said casually. He didn't know that one gesture would echo louder than it should have. Back at home, Marcus helped with dinner. The kids were loud and covered in glue from an art project. My clothes smelled like onions and poster paint. I told him a bit about the new office, about the orientation, the building, the tasks. I didn't mention Kamal, not because I had anything to hide, but because I didn't yet understand why I had noticed him more than I should have. By my second week at Talcott & Co., the rhythm of the office started to settle around me. There was the quiet hum of productivity by 8:45 a.m., the scent of burnt coffee lingering near the pantry, and the ever-present tap of keyboards echoing through the open floor plan. Everyone moved like they had somewhere more important to be, meetings to command, deadlines to strangle. I did my best to keep up, but everything felt faster than I remembered, like I'd stepped onto a moving walkway going the wrong way. That's where Kamal came in. He had a way of making the overwhelming parts feel manageable. He'd swing by my desk with a sly, almost conspiratorial smile and whisper tips. "Don't CC Brad unless you want an essay in return." Or, "Order your lunch before 11:45, or you'll be stuck with the sad pasta." His humor was never loud. It was dry, intelligent, the kind that made me laugh in ways I hadn't in years. Not because the jokes were hysterical, but because they landed somewhere beneath the surface. The kind of laugh that felt like remembering yourself. We started having lunch together more often, always in the communal break room, always around others. It wasn't intimate, at least not in a traditional sense, but there was something about it. The way he listened when I spoke, not nodding while staring at his phone, but really listening, like my words carried weight. One Thursday, I mentioned in passing that I used to love fish tacos from a little spot in Logan Square, a place I hadn't visited since my second child was born. The next day, he handed me a brown bag. "I was in the area," he said simply. "Figured you might want a throwback. Inside, fish tacos." From that exact place. I froze for a second too long before laughing it off. "Wow, you remembered?" He shrugged. "You said they made your week once." That night, Marcus was loading the dishwasher while our oldest screamed about a missing Lego piece. I smiled as I watched him, his familiar hands, the curve of his back, the quiet steadiness of our life. And still, Kamal's gesture replayed in my head, not because it was romantic, but because it was personal. And that was when I first felt the smallest pinch of guilt. It was the taco lunch that stirred something I couldn't easily put back. I told myself it was harmless, a sweet, thoughtful gesture from a colleague. That was the story I repeated as I tossed the brown paper bag into the recycling bin that evening, as I chewed through dinner with Marcus and nodded along to the kids' chaotic retelling of their day at school. But a part of me lingered back in that office, holding that warm bag in my hand, hearing Kamal's voice saying, "You said they made your week once." He had remembered, not just the words I'd said, but how I'd said them. Like that tiny offhand comment mattered. Like I mattered. I wanted to forget it. Instead, I replayed the moment on a loop. His face, open, unreadable. My reaction, too bright, too touched. The next morning, I picked out a soft blue blouse I hadn't worn since before maternity leave. It wasn't revealing, not even close, but it made me feel aware of myself, my shape, my presence. I spritzed on a perfume I hadn't worn in over a year, a subtle vanilla amber scent that used to feel like confidence in a bottle. Marcus didn't notice. Or maybe he did, and didn't comment. He was rushing to get the kids into the car for school drop-off. I kissed him goodbye, a quick, practiced peck, and headed out into the crisp Chicago morning. At the office, I saw Kamal near the elevator. He smiled like always, nothing unusual, but I felt my heart quicken. It wasn't him. Not really. It was the version of me that he reflected back, capable, interesting, visible. "Morning," he said, holding the door for me. "Thanks," I replied, too quickly, too lightly, and I laughed at something that wasn't really funny. I could feel it, the slow, steady slide into something dangerous. Not an affair, not even flirtation, but attention, and the way I was beginning to crave it. At home that night, Marcus was lying on the couch, half asleep while a documentary played. I curled up beside him. He pulled me close instinctively, like he always did. There was love there. A long, steady love that had weathered sleep deprivation, job changes, stomach bugs, and financial scares. But my mind wandered. Not to anything physical, not to fantasies or possibilities, just to the feeling of being noticed. And that was enough to make me feel like I was betraying something sacred. I told myself nothing had changed. That was the lie. The truth was subtler. It lived in the way I started dressing each morning. Not for Kamal exactly, but for the version of myself I became when he was around. A little more polished, lip gloss, a blouse with a softer neckline, shoes I used to save for client meetings. Not seductive, not obvious, just intentional. At work, I noticed my posture when I spoke in meetings. I was sharper, more decisive. Kamal once leaned over during a conference call, slipped me a sticky note that read, "You're the calmest one in this circus." I smiled too hard, tucked the note into my notebook. Later, I'd look at it and feel foolish, and also flattered. The problem with a slow burn is that it gives you time to rationalize everything. Nothing was technically inappropriate. We didn't text outside of work. There were no late-night messages, no coffee dates beyond the break room. But it was the in-between moments that got me. A glance held just a second too long. The way he'd listen when I talked, how he made space for my words. At home, Marcus remained steady, loving in his quiet, unwavering way. He helped with the dishes, played Monster Chase with the kids, and rubbed my feet on the weekends without being asked. He'd always been like that, thoughtful in action, not words. We didn't have the flirty banter anymore. Conversations were mostly logistics, bedtimes, grocery lists, bills. We were in the thick of married life, good, solid, but not romantic. One night, after we put the kids down, I lay beside Marcus and stared at the ceiling fan turning overhead. He reached over, half asleep, and laced his fingers through mine. That simple gesture undid me. My throat tightened with a guilt so raw it felt like shame. I wanted to wake him and confess something. Not an act, but a feeling. But what would I even say? I like how someone else makes me feel. I miss being admired. I don't want to want this. So instead, I held his hand tighter, and I wept, silently, staring at the shadows on our ceiling, because I knew something was slipping. Not out there, but inside me, and I wasn't sure how to stop it. The thing about emotional intimacy is that it rarely feels dangerous until it's too close. It sneaks in, quiet, slow, deceptively harmless. It wraps itself in shared glances, in knowing smiles, in the ease of conversation that asks nothing from you but gives everything back. That's what it felt like with Kamal. We didn't talk about personal things, not directly. But there were little threads that tied us closer. The way he noticed when I was quiet. The way I knew he needed coffee after back-to-back meetings and sometimes brought him one without asking. The way our rhythms matched. One afternoon, after a particularly grueling client call, he leaned back in his chair, looked over the cubicle wall, and said, "You handled that like a boss." I laughed. "You mean I didn't cry or curse?" "No," he said, "I mean you were steady. You made everyone else feel like the sky wasn't falling." That's not nothing. It wasn't a flirt. It wasn't even suggestive. But it struck something in me that ached to be seen. To be recognized not as someone's wife, not as a mom who kept it all together, but as a woman. Sharp, resilient, whole. I wanted to tell Marcus. I wanted to tell him how sometimes I felt invisible. Not because he made me feel that way, but because life did. The constant hum of responsibility, work, parenting, bills, left little room for admiration. We were partners in every sense, but romance had quietly left the room years ago. We didn't even notice. And now here was Kamal noticing. That evening, Marcus and I sat on the couch, eating Chinese takeout while the kids watched a cartoon in the other room. He looked at me and smiled mid-chew. "You've been glowing lately," he said. "This new job suits you." I froze for a second. The compliment, so rare, landed in the middle of my chest like a knock I hadn't expected. "Thanks," I said, my voice too quiet. "It's been good." I didn't say it was complicated. I didn't say I was confused. But for the first time, I wondered what would happen if this emotional thread with Kamal kept unraveling. And I knew the answer. Nothing physical. Never that. But also, something had already begun. Something real. That weekend, the air in Chicago turned warmer. One of those rare spring days where everything feels softer, lighter, as if winter's grip is finally giving way. The kids wanted to play outside, and Marcus suggested we all go to the lakefront. It had been a while since we did something like that together. Not just shuffled through errands or collapsed into routine, but actually existed in the same space as a family without rushing through it. We packed sandwiches, juice boxes, and a change of clothes. The kids ran wild on the grass near Montrose Beach, their squeals carried on the breeze. I sat on the picnic blanket and watched Marcus chase our youngest around a patch of wildflowers. He was laughing, full, unrestrained. He still had that boyish charm, the one that had pulled me in during our college years, the one that made me believe we'd never get tired of each other. For a moment, I felt something close to peace, and then guilt. Because even in that still perfect scene, I thought of Kamal, not in a romantic way, not even longingly, but as a shadow that hadn't quite left, like I was carrying around a secret echo of a version of myself that didn't belong here. It didn't ruin the moment, but it dimmed it. And I hated that. Later that night, after the kids were asleep and the house had settled into silence, Marcus and I folded laundry on the bed. Mismatched socks, tiny shirts, a towel that had somehow turned pink in the wash. He made a joke about our daughter's glitter invasion, and I laughed, for real. That deep, honest kind of laugh that bubbles up when something is genuinely funny, not just polite. Marcus looked over at me, that gentle kind of look he'd always had. Not intense, not probing, just soft, familiar. "I've missed that laugh," he said, and I realized so had I. Not just the sound, but the space it came from, the part of me that had slowly been buried under responsibility, under the endless doing, the part Kamal had accidentally unearthed. Not because he was special, but because I had forgotten how to feel seen, even in the presence of someone who had loved me faithfully for over a decade. It hit me then. The threat wasn't Kamal. It was the mirror he held up to my marriage, to myself. And the longer I looked, the more I knew something had to shift. Not between Kamal and me, but between Marcus and me. Between me and myself. The next week at work was relentless. Back-to-back meetings, a new client onboarding, and a pitch presentation that had the whole office buzzing. Kamal and I barely spoke outside of shared meeting rooms and the occasional good morning at the coffee machine. It should have felt like a relief. Instead, I found myself missing the ease of our conversations, the quiet moments when the world felt less heavy. But the silence between us wasn't awkward. It was intentional, and I understood why. By Thursday, things had slowed enough for us to step out for coffee, just a 5-minute walk to the cafe down the block. We ordered lattes, mine with oat milk, his black, and waited outside while they prepped the drinks. He stood beside me, hands in his coat pockets, face tilted toward the sun like it had been too long since he'd felt it. And then he asked, softly without pretense, "How do you manage it all?" I turned to him, puzzled. "Manage what?" "Work, kids, marriage. You make it seem easy." His voice wasn't flirtatious, it wasn't prying, just curious, and maybe something gentler underneath like admiration, maybe longing, maybe both. And I almost answered him honestly. I almost said, "I don't always manage. I'm drowning sometimes. I feel invisible in my own home. I ache to be something more than useful. I miss being seen. I miss wanting and being wanted." But I didn't. I looked away, took a breath, and gave him a smile that was both true and deflective. "Discipline," I said, "and a husband who makes me laugh." There was a pause. Not awkward, just quiet. He nodded. "Lucky guy," he said. I didn't answer that part. We walked back to the office, our coffees warm in our hands, the silence between us filled with unspoken understanding. Something had shifted. He felt it. I felt it. And I think in that moment, we both knew. This was the crossroads. The place where something could have taken root, grown into something beautiful and catastrophic. But it wouldn't, because I had chosen. Quietly, clearly. And that was the beginning of everything changing. After that coffee walk, something inside me clicked into place, not with loud certainty, but with a quiet, resolute clarity. I didn't need to have a dramatic confrontation with Kamal. I didn't need to declare anything or explain my choice. I just needed to shift the current, change the tone, steer the ship back to shore before it wandered too far into a sea I didn't belong in. I started small. I stopped staying late unless it was absolutely necessary. If a conversation drifted toward the personal, I gently nudged it back to project timelines or client deliverables. When he complimented my work, which he still did from time to time, I responded with polite gratitude and quickly changed the subject. I spoke more openly about Marcus and the kids during breaks, inserting them into my stories even when it felt awkward or exposed. Kamal got the message without needing to be told. He didn't push, didn't withdraw in bitterness. He matched my new boundaries with grace, retreating just enough to respect the space I needed. The warmth between us remained, but the edge of it softened. The pull faded. There were no accusations, no disappointment, just mutual silent agreement. This is where it stops. What surprised me most wasn't how he responded, it was how I felt. Relieved, lighter. Like I had closed a door before the wind could rip it off its hinges. There was power in that. Not the power of denial, but of awareness. I saw what could have happened. I also saw who I wanted to be, and I had chosen accordingly. That night, I found Marcus in the kitchen, washing out our youngest lunchbox. He was humming some terrible 90s R&B song under his breath, off-key as always. I leaned against the doorway and watched him, suddenly overwhelmed with tenderness. He didn't always see me. Not the way Kamal did. But he stayed. He showed up. He was the man who folded the laundry, booked dentist appointments, and left post-it notes on my dashboard that read, "You've got this." And I realized if I wanted to be seen in this marriage, I had to be willing to stand in it, fully, not just wait to be noticed, but to show up as someone worth noticing again. That was the beginning of healing. Not dramatic, not immediate, but real. Temptation doesn't always arrive in grand gestures or stolen glances. Sometimes it walks in wearing kindness and consistency. Sometimes it sounds like someone finally asking, "How are you really?" and meaning it. And if you're not careful, or if you're running on empty, attention can start to feel like affection, like a lifeline. But I'd found my own lifeline. And this time, I didn't reach for someone else. I reached for the woman I used to be. I reached for Marcus. And slowly, we began to find each other again.